The morning of April 18th, 1979, dawned with the quiet, unassuming promise of any other spring day in Evanston, Illinois. The manicured lawns were still damp with dew, the milk bottles waited patiently on front steps, and the greatest disturbance on the suburban streets was the rumble of the day's first garbage truck. In a modest, two-story home on a tree-lined avenue, a man named Alexi Pitishin was likely preparing for his day. He was a copywriter, a man who worked with words, crafting descriptions for power tools and patio furniture. He was, to all appearances, a quiet, unremarkable part of the American tapestry. But as the sun climbed higher, that tapestry was about to be violently torn. Unmarked sedans slid silently to the curb. Men in dark conservative suits emerged, their movements economical and precise. They were not there to deliver mail or read a meter. They were agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and when they hammered on Alexi Pitishin's door, they shattered not just the morning's peace, but a carefully constructed illusion that had persisted for years. Pitishin was not just a copywriter, he was a ghost, a sleeper agent, a dedicated officer of the Soviet Union's Committee for State Security, the KGB. His arrest was not a singular event. At that exact same moment, in coordinated raids across the American Midwest, in Chicago, Milwaukee, and Cleveland, other doors were being breached. A network of phantoms, living and breathing undetected within the heartland of their sworn enemy, was being systematically dismantled. The operation was a stunning counterintelligence success, a decisive blow against a sophisticated Soviet espionage ring. But the question that echoed through the halls of the FBI's Chicago field office was not just who these spies were, but how they had been found. The answer was, to the seasoned agents running the case, almost unbelievable. The tip had not come from a high-level defector smuggled out of Moscow. It was not the result of a lucky wiretap or a decrypted satellite intercept. It did not originate from a double agent deep within the Kremlin. The source that had unraveled this entire conspiracy, the domino that triggered the collapse of a multi-year, multi-state intelligence operation, was something far more ordinary. The clue was not found in a locked briefcase or a hollowed-out coin. It was found on the coffee tables and in the mailboxes of 40 million American homes. It was discovered hiding in plain sight, nestled amongst advertisements for Kenmore appliances and Craftsman tools, within the glossy, colorful pages of the Sears, Roebuck and Company catalog. This is the story of how the most iconic, trusted, and quintessentially American document of its time was weaponized by the KGB to become a covert channel for espionage. It is the story of a secret war fought not in the alleyways of Berlin or the jungles of Southeast Asia, but in the mundane product descriptions of a mail-order catalog. Our central thesis is this. In the long, paranoid twilight of the Cold War, the most ingenious secrets are not those buried deepest, but those hidden most openly. And the complex Soviet cipher, a system designed to be utterly invisible to the combined might of American intelligence, was ultimately cracked not by a supercomputer or a team of seasoned analysts, but by the one person who saw the world differently enough to look closer. This entire sophisticated network was brought down by a quiet, socially awkward 13-year-old boy from the suburbs, whose unique perception of reality allowed him to see the invisible ink bleeding through the pages of the American dream. This case would prove, once and for all, that the most formidable code breakers are often the ones a society is least prepared to recognize, and that the most dangerous threats are sometimes delivered right to your front door. The takedown of Alexi Pitishin and his cell was the end of their story. But for us, it is the beginning. To understand how a book of domestic dreams became a tool for international espionage, we must go back. We must rewind past the arrests, past the frantic investigation to a time before the FBI even knew a threat existed. We must go to a quiet house in another Chicago suburb, where a boy with an obsession for patterns was about to stumble upon a secret that would change the course of his life and alter the very nature of the silent war being waged between two global superpowers. He was about to prove that sometimes the only way to see the truth is to be the only one looking for the one thing that doesn't belong. The story of the Sears Catalog spies is more than a simple footnote in Cold War history. It is a profound lesson in perception. It challenges our very understanding of where battlefields can be found and who can rise to become a hero. It reveals that the intricate game of nations is not always won by the powerful and the expected. In the late 1970s, the Soviet Union believed it had created the perfect, untraceable communication system. They had accounted for the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA. They had factored in every technological and human surveillance capability the United States could bring to bear. But they had not accounted for Michael Hartley. They had not accounted for the obsessive, brilliant mind of a 13-year-old boy who found more comfort in the logic of codes than in the chaos of the world around him. And that single, overlooked variable would be their undoing. The first domino was about to be placed, not in an intelligence agency's headquarters, but on a shag carpet in a suburban living room. To truly grasp the impossibility of what happened in the spring of 1979, we must first immerse ourselves in the world that created it. The late 1970s in America was a decade gasping for breath. The nation was nursing a collective hangover from the twin traumas of Vietnam and Watergate. The swagger of the post-war years had evaporated, replaced by a cynical, weary introspection. In Washington, the Church Committee hearings of the mid-70s had pulled back the curtain on the nation's own intelligence agencies, revealing a disturbing history of domestic surveillance, assassination plots, and illegal operations. The CIA and FBI, once seen as infallible guardians of the Republic, were now viewed with a deep and abiding suspicion by a significant portion of the populace. This was the era of President Jimmy Carter, of fuel shortages, of economic malaise. The Cold War, while ever present, felt to many like a distant, abstract horror, a game played by grim-faced men in trench coats on the foggy streets of European capitals, or by missile commanders in hardened bunkers a mile beneath the earth. The myth, the comforting illusion that Americans clung to, was that this global struggle was happening over there. The heartland, the vast suburban expanse of places like Arlington Heights, Illinois, was believed to be a sanctuary. It was the realm of station wagons, backyard barbecues, and little league games. It was the physical manifestation of the American dream, a world insulated from the geopolitical chess match being played for the fate of the world. And no single object embodied this myth of domestic safety and consumer contentment more powerfully than the Sears Roebuck and Company catalog. It was not merely a book for shopping, it was a cultural institution, a heavyweight champion of print that landed with a momentous thud on millions of doorsteps twice a year. Dubbed the Big Book, or the Wish Book, it was a 500-page Bible of American capitalism. Within its pages, a family could build a life from scratch. You could buy your tools from Sears, your clothes from Sears, the very lumber to build your house from Sears. It was a tangible promise of prosperity, a universe of choice delivered directly to you. For rural families, it was a lifeline to the modern world. For suburban families, it was a source of entertainment, a catalog of aspirations. Children would dog-ear the toy section before Christmas. Teenagers would gaze at the latest fashions, and parents would plan home improvements. The Sears Catalog was as American as apple pie and baseball. It was a symbol of trust, reliability, and the peaceful, orderly pursuit of a better life. The idea that this book, this icon of domesticity, could be a vessel for enemy spies was not just unlikely, it was unthinkable. It was a violation of the sacred boundary between the home front and the front lines. It was into this world, this suburb, this very home, that Michael Hartley was born. And from an early age, it was clear to his parents, Gordon and Patricia, that their son experienced reality on a different frequency. This was 1979. The term autism spectrum disorder was a clinical obscurity. a year away from even entering the official diagnostic manual. Public understanding was virtually non-existent. To most teachers and classmates, Michael was simply different. He was quiet, intensely private, and struggled with the unspoken rules of social interaction that came so naturally to others. Small talk was an indecipherable code. Eye contact felt like an invasive glare. Unexpected noises or changes in his routine could trigger overwhelming anxiety. But within this quiet, reserved boy was a mind of extraordinary power. While he had been slow to speak, he was reading at a high school level by the age of 6. His intellect was not just sharp, it was structured in a fundamentally different way. Where others saw forests, Michael saw individual trees, analyzing the precise angle of every branch, the unique pattern of every leaf. His mind was a systemizing engine, drawn not to the messy, unpredictable world of human emotions, but to the elegant, logical, and rule-based universes of mathematics, mechanics, and eventually, his greatest passion, cryptography. The obsession began, as many do, with a book. His father, an electrical engineer at Motorola, brought home David Kahn's The Codebreakers, a monumental 1,100-page history of secret writing. For most teenagers, it would have been an intimidating, impenetrable slab of text. For Michael, it was a revelation. He didn't just read it, he consumed it, cover to cover, 3 times. The book opened a door into a world that made perfect sense to him. A world where information was meticulously organized, where hidden structures lay beneath a chaotic surface, and where logic was the key to unlocking absolute truth. He plunged headfirst into this new world. The Arlington Heights Library became his second home as he checked out every book he could find on the subject. He taught himself the simple substitution ciphers of Julius Caesar, the complex polyalphabetic systems of Vigenère, the mechanical marvel of the German Enigma machine that Alan Turing had famously broken, and the unbreakable security of the one-time pad. He filled notebooks not with doodles or class notes, but with his own elaborate encryption systems. He would encode the most mundane messages imaginable. I fed the dog. It's raining today, not because they needed to be secret, but for the sheer joy of the process. It was a mental exercise that soothed him, a way of imposing order on a world that often felt disorderly. His parents watched with a mixture of pride and concern. They saw his brilliance, the fierce, single-minded intensity he brought to his interests. His 8th-grade algebra teacher confirmed it, telling them Michael had essentially checked out of her class because he'd spent the summer teaching himself calculus and was now quietly working his way through college textbooks in the back of the room. Yet, they also worried. How would this boy, who preferred the company of ciphers to the company of his peers, navigate a world that demanded social grace and emotional intuition? They could not have known that the very qualities that made him an outsider were honing a skill set that the nation's top intelligence agencies would soon desperately need. And so, we have our 2 opposing forces set on a collision course they cannot see. On one side, the antagonist, not a person but an idea, a doctrine of espionage. The KGB, having seen its traditional methods of communication, microdots, invisible ink, shortwave radio, increasingly compromised by Western counterintelligence, had evolved. They sought a cleaner method, something that generated no electronic signals to be traced, required no suspicious dead drops to be surveilled, and left no physical evidence to be discovered. Their solution was an audacious leap into the art of steganography, the practice of concealing a message within another, non-secret message or object. The goal was not to make the message unreadable, but to make it invisible. The communication had to disappear into the background noise of the target country. And what was louder, more ubiquitous, and more ignored than the relentless noise of American consumerism? The Sears Catalog was the perfect vehicle. It was a Trojan horse delivered by the mailman. On the other side, we have Michael Hartley, a boy whose brain was uniquely wired to detect anomalies in systems. He was not looking for spies. He was not on a mission. He was simply living in a world of patterns. And he was about to come face to face with a deliberate, malicious disruption in the largest pattern book in his house. The stage was set. The myth of American domestic security was about to be shattered. The antagonist, a hidden message system of unparalleled genius, was in place, and the unlikely hero, a boy armed with nothing but a library card and a different way of seeing the world, was about to open the book. The first week of February, 1979. A mail truck makes its rounds through the quiet streets of Arlington Heights. In the Hartley family's mailbox, amongst the bills and personal letters, lands the spring-summer 1979 Sears Roebuck & Company catalog. It is a moment repeated, in some form, in tens of millions of homes across the nation. An utterly mundane event. But this specific copy, this 400-page, 2-pound behemoth of consumer desire, is a loaded weapon. It contains a message intended for a Soviet spy, a set of instructions for a clandestine meeting. The fuse has been lit. The only question is whether anyone will notice the bomb before it detonates silently and invisibly. For days, the catalog sits in the Hartley home, just as it sits in countless others, an inert piece of household furniture. Then, on Sunday, February 11th, the world tilts on its axis. Michael is lying on the living room floor, idly flipping through the catalog. This is not unusual. He is drawn to large, organized collections of data, dictionaries, phone books, and yes, mail-order catalogs. He appreciates their internal logic, the systematic presentation of information. He isn't looking for anything to buy. He is simply observing the system. He finds himself in the automotive section, a world of car batteries, spark plugs, and motor oil. His eyes drift across the dense blocks of text, the detailed product descriptions. And then, he sees it. It's not a glaring error, it's not a typo, it's something far more subtle, a phrase that feels wrong. It's like a single note played slightly out of key in an otherwise perfect symphony. A description for a set of jumper cables might contain the line, "tested under extreme northern conditions." Why? Jumper cables were a universal product. Why specify northern conditions, a phrase more suited for Arctic parkas or engine block heaters? Another product, perhaps a common household wrench set, might include the odd qualifier, recommended for industrial applications. It's grammatically correct, but contextually dissonant. It breaks the established pattern of the catalog's voice, which is typically geared toward the home consumer. To 99.9% of the population, these are meaningless quirks, the clumsy fingerprints of a dozen different copywriters working on a tight deadline. The human brain is a magnificent filtering machine, designed to smooth over such minor inconsistencies, to dismiss them as irrelevant noise in the service of understanding the bigger picture. But Michael Hartley's brain was not built that way. His mind didn't filter the noise. It amplified it. For him, an anomaly in a system wasn't a quirk to be ignored. It was a fundamental error that demanded investigation. That out-of-key note didn't just sound odd, it was a violation of the music itself. The hook was set. An intellectual itch had begun that he was psychologically incapable of not scratching. He retrieved a fresh composition notebook, the kind used by students everywhere, and began his quest. This was no longer idle browsing. This was work. He started from page 1, systematically, meticulously, reading every single product description in the entire catalog. Page by page, section by section, from lingerie to lawnmowers, he hunted for the wrong notes. When he found one, he would carefully record the phrase itself, the page number it was on, the product category, and the specific item number. This was a Herculean task of tedious, mind-numbing labor that would have driven any typical teenager to madness within an hour. But for Michael, it was calming. The methodical process of searching, identifying, and recording was a ritual that brought order to his thoughts. It was a puzzle, and he loved puzzles. By the end of that first Sunday, his notebook contained 17 phrases. By the end of the week, the list had grown to 43. The phrases themselves were a collection of bland corporate jargon, available in regional markets only. Further details available upon request. Model configuration subject to change. They were designed to be boring, to be skipped over, to be utterly forgettable. And that, he began to suspect, was the entire point. His first hypothesis was rooted in classic cryptography. He assumed the message was encoded within the text of the anomalous phrases themselves. He tried the simplest methods first, the kind used by children with secret decoder rings. He wrote down the first letter of each phrase in the order they appeared in the catalog. The result was gibberish. He tried the last letter of each phrase. Nothing. He experimented with more complex patterns. The first letter of every second phrase, the third letter of every fifth phrase. He tried assigning numerical values to letters, searching for a mathematical sequence. He spent days, then weeks, filling page after page of his notebook with dead ends and failed theories. The frustration would have been enough to make anyone else quit, to conclude they were simply seeing patterns where none existed, a victim of their own overactive imagination. But for Michael, the existence of the pattern was a logical certainty. 43 deliberate systemic anomalies were not the product of random chance. The system was broken, and it was broken on purpose. To give up would be to accept a logical contradiction, and that was something his mind could not do. His obsession deepened. He would come home from school and go straight to his room to work on what he now called the catalog problem. He skipped dinners, lost in his world of numbers and letters, deaf to his mother's calls. His grades, once flawless, began to dip, not from a lack of ability, but from a complete and total reallocation of his formidable mental resources. The breakthrough, when it finally came, was a moment of pure, paradigm-shifting insight. It was the night of March 2nd, nearly 3 weeks into his obsessive quest. He was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, mentally replaying all of his failed attempts. His error, he realized, had been one of assumption. He had been treating the problem like every other code he had ever studied, assuming the unusual phrases were the encrypted message. But what if he was wrong? What if the phrases weren't the message at all? What if they were just pointers, markers, signposts pointing to the real message hidden somewhere else? He shot out of bed, his mind racing. He flipped on his desk lamp, the catalog and his notebook spread out before him like a general's battle map. He looked at one of the entries, page 487, the jumper cables, item number 369427. The phrase was tested under extreme northern conditions. He had been trying to decode the words, but what if the secret wasn't in the words, but in the numbers? Not the price, but the page and item numbers themselves. He remembered a section from The Codebreakers about a very old form of cryptography known as a book cipher. In a book cipher, two parties agree to use a specific, widely available book as their key. A message is encoded as a series of numbers that correspond to a page, a line on that page, and a character within that line. To anyone else, the string of numbers is meaningless. But to someone with the right book, the key, the message reveals itself. And what book was more widely and uniformly available in the United States in 1979 than the Sears Catalog? Millions of identical copies, distributed for free, utterly untraceable and above suspicion. It was the perfect key. With trembling hands, he decided to test his new theory. He took the first anomalous phrase he had found. It was on page 127 for an item with the number 846234. What if the item number wasn't a single number, but a set of coordinates? Page 84. Line 62. Character 34. He grabbed the catalog, his heart pounding. He turned to page 84. He painstakingly counted down 62 lines of text. Then he counted across to the 34th character. It was the letter M. He wrote it down. He moved to the second phrase on his list. Page 316, item number 52, there's 8915. He turned to page 52. He counted down 89 lines. He counted over to the 15th character. It was the letter T. He wrote it next to the M. He kept going, his movements becoming faster, more certain with each new letter. The third phrase yielded an S, then a U, an N, a D, an A, a Y. He stopped, staring at the letters he had written, M-T-S-U-N-D-A-Y. For a moment, it was just another string of nonsense, but his brain, churning through possibilities, rearranged it. Meet Sunday. The abbreviation MT for meet. It was common in telegraphists, in classified ads, in the very kind of concise, operational language a spy might use. A profound chill went through him. This was no longer an academic exercise. This was real. He worked frantically now, decoding the remaining 36 phrases he had cataloged. Each item number yielded another character, another piece of the puzzle, the coordinates guiding him on a scavenger hunt through the massive book. When he was finished, he sat back and read the full, horrifying message his notebook now contained. Meet Sunday. 1800 Grant Park Bench, 47 Red Scarf, confirm, via usual channel package ready. The words hung in the air of his small bedroom. 1800 hours. A red scarf for recognition. A package. This was the unambiguous language of espionage, the tradecraft he had read about in history books, now staring back at him from his own notebook. The secret war he thought was happening over there was happening right here in Chicago. A meeting had been planned. A package was waiting. For the first time in his 3-week odyssey, Michael Hartley was truly and deeply afraid. He went downstairs to find his parents. The first domino had just fallen, and it was about to trigger a chain reaction that would reach all the way to Moscow. The late-night phone call from Gordon Hartley to the FBI's Chicago field office was, on its surface, exactly the kind of call the duty officers are trained to handle with polite skepticism. A man, an engineer, claiming his 13-year-old son had discovered a Soviet spy code hidden in a Sears catalog. It sounded like a prank, or worse, the fantasy of a troubled mind. But the duty officer on that Friday night in March 1979 did his job. He took the information, logged the call, and passed it up the chain. And on Monday morning, the file landed on the desk of Agent Thomas Kovach. When Kovach arrived at the Hartley home that afternoon, he was the embodiment of professional doubt. A man in a dark suit, trained to separate fact from fiction, walking into a suburban kitchen to interview a child about espionage. But as Michael, home from school, laid out his work on the kitchen table, the catalog, the notebooks filled with failed attempts, the final successful decryption, Kovach's skepticism began to dissolve, replaced by a growing sense of astonishment. The boy didn't just have a theory, he had a methodology. He walked the agent through the process step by painstaking step. This wasn't a lucky guess. It was a feat of cryptographic reverse engineering. Kovach left the Hartley home with the catalog and Michael's notebooks, promising to have analysts look them over. Back at the FBI lab, that initial astonishment turned into a full-blown holy cow moment. The cryptanalysts verified Michael's work in a matter of hours. The pattern was real. The code was sound. The message was legitimate. The twist, the shocking truth that sent ripples through the counterintelligence division, was the sheer genius of the delivery system. The myth that the Cold War was a foreign affair, fought in distant lands, had been a lie. The truth was that the enemy had found a way to walk through the front door, disguised as junk mail. The battleground was the American living room. Immediately, the FBI launched a full-scale, highly classified investigation codenamed Operation Catalog. The first order of business was to determine the scope of the breach. Was this a one-time message, or something more systemic? Agents fanned out, collecting previous editions of the Sears Catalog from the Bureau's own archives and public libraries. They worked backwards, searching for the same telltale linguistic anomalies Michael had identified. They found them. The fall 1978 catalog contained a coded message. So did the spring 1978 edition. And the fall 1977. Each catalog contained between 35 and 50 of the pointer phrases. Each one, when decoded using Michael's page-line character system, yielded a short, operational message about meeting times, locations, and recognition signals. The FBI was staring at a covert communication network that had been running successfully, completely under their noses, for at least 2 years, possibly longer. The ripple effect of Michael's discovery was now a tidal wave inside the Bureau. The second, more urgent question was, who? Who was sending these messages, and who was receiving them? The decoded messages provided the first clues. Meet Sunday, 1800 Grant Park Bench 47. To a tourist, Bench 47 was meaningless. To FBI agents familiar with Chicago, it was a specific, physical location. They discovered that certain benches in the park, part of a sponsorship program, were indeed numbered with small plaques. Bench 47 was real, located in a relatively isolated spot facing Lake Michigan. The FBI placed it under immediate surveillance even though they knew the meeting from the current catalog had likely already passed. But older messages pointed to other locations, not just in Chicago, but in Milwaukee, Detroit, and Cleveland. This wasn't a lone agent. This was a regional network. The investigation then turned to the source of the infection, Sears, Roebuck and Company. The Sears Tower in Chicago, at the time the tallest building in the world, was a gleaming monument to American free enterprise. Now it was the focal point of a major espionage investigation. FBI agents met with bewildered Sears executives, explaining only that they were investigating a security breach. They requested a list of every employee, copywriters, editors, designers, production staff, who had access to the catalog's content during its creation. The list contained over 300 names. The methodical, painstaking work of vetting each and every one of them began. The breakthrough came on March 24th. A background check on a 41-year-old copywriter named Alexi Pitishin raised a red flag. A naturalized citizen, Pitishin had emigrated from the Soviet Union in 1962. His work record at Sears was spotless, but the FBI's deep dive into his past uncovered something he had conveniently omitted from his immigration paperwork. A 3-year stint in the Soviet Army, including service in the GRU, Soviet Military Intelligence. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was more than enough to justify intense scrutiny. The FBI put Pitishin under 24/7 surveillance. They tapped his phone, monitored his mail, and tailed his movements. They even managed to place a female undercover agent inside the Sears Catalog division, posing as a temporary copywriter. Her job was to get close to Pitishin, to observe his habits. The picture that emerged was deeply suspicious. Pitishin was a loner who often worked late, long after his colleagues had gone home. The undercover agent observed him making what he called minor corrections to product descriptions late at night. The changes were so small they would never trigger a review by an editor. He worked from a handwritten list he kept locked in his desk, a list he guarded jealously. He was the mole. He was the one planting the pointer phrases. With the source identified, the FBI prepared to dismantle the entire network. On April 18, 1979, the dominoes fell hard and fast. Pitishin was arrested at his home in Evanston. Simultaneously, raids were conducted on 7 other suspects across the Midwest. The evidence they found was damning and confirmed their worst fears. In a false bottom drawer in Pitishin's dresser, agents found his spy kit, a one-time pad, the gold standard of unbreakable cryptographic communication, used only by professional intelligence services, a cipher key, and, most damningly, a Soviet passport bearing his birth name, Dmitry Kavelin. They also found a work list for the upcoming fall 1979 catalog with notes in Russian outlining the next series of coded messages. The searches of the other suspects' homes revealed the nature of the intelligence they were gathering. It wasn't top-secret military plans. It was economic and industrial intelligence, technical specifications for American manufacturing equipment, data on industrial output, information on labor unrest, and maps of defense contractor facilities. In the late 1970s, as the Soviet command economy was beginning to stagnate and fall behind the West technologically, this kind of information was pure gold. It allowed Soviet planners to gauge American capabilities, identify vulnerabilities, and steal technology, saving them billions in research and development. The ripple effect was now complete. A boy's curiosity had led to an FBI investigation, which led to the unmasking of a mole, which led to the complete collapse of a vital KGB intelligence network. The case revealed a chilling new frontier in the Cold War. The Soviets were no longer just targeting military bases and government agencies. They were targeting the very fabric of American culture, turning its most cherished symbols into weapons. The FBI had caught them this time, but the discovery forced a fundamental reassessment of counterintelligence. The battlefield was everywhere. The threat could come from anywhere. And it had all been exposed because one boy on a shag carpet had noticed that something, in a book full of perfectly normal things, just didn't look right. The trial of Alexi Pitishin, or rather Dmitry Kavelin, commenced in September 1979. The public story was that of a Soviet spy caught through diligent, if unspecified, FBI work. The courtroom drama unfolded without any mention of a 13-year-old boy or his composition notebooks. The prosecution built its case on the physical evidence: the one-time pad, the Soviet passport, the meticulous plans for future coded catalogs. The evidence was irrefutable. In November, Kavelin was convicted on multiple counts of espionage and sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. He would die there in 1997, a forgotten soldier of a lost war. Several of his co-conspirators, Soviet nationals, were quietly traded back to the USSR in a 1983 prisoner exchange, a classic, pragmatic move from the Cold War playbook, swapping pawns to maintain the global stalemate. For Sears, the affair was a quiet embarrassment and a loud wake-up call. Though never implicated in any wrongdoing, the company had been profoundly exploited. Working with the FBI, they implemented new, multi-layered editorial review processes to ensure such a thing could never happen again. The fall 1979 catalog and all subsequent editions were clean, but the era of the big book was already waning. By 1993, faced with a changing retail landscape, Sears discontinued its iconic general catalog, a victim not of espionage, but of the slow, inexorable march of progress toward a more digital, less tangible world. The perfect key to a perfect cipher had simply ceased to exist. And what of Michael Hartley? His role remained one of the Cold War's best-kept secrets. He and his family were debriefed by the FBI and sworn to secrecy. Life, on the surface, returned to normal. He went back to his 8th grade classes, to the familiar rhythms of school and home. His teachers and classmates never knew that the quiet, awkward boy in the back of the room, the one who seemed lost in his own world of numbers and equations, had just won a major battle for the United States. He continued to receive occasional, discreet visits from agents who would sometimes consult him, unofficially, on other pattern recognition problems. He had become, in a way, the FBI's secret weapon. Michael's path was set. He graduated high school, and it was no surprise to anyone who knew him that he enrolled at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to study mathematics. He earned his Ph.D. and embarked on a distinguished career in the very field that had once been his childhood obsession: cryptography and computer security. He would spend his adult life working for defense contractors on classified projects, building the very codes and digital defenses meant to protect the nation. The boy who broke the code grew into a man who built the walls, his unique mind now formally enlisted in the ongoing silent war of information. Decades later, looking back on the strange case of the Sears Catalog spies, the universal lesson it offers is not one of espionage, but of perception. Our world is governed by immense, complex systems: social, technological, linguistic. Most of us navigate these systems by ignoring the details, by accepting the general pattern as reality. We are conditioned to see the forest, not the trees. The story of Michael Hartley is a powerful testament to the value of those who are wired differently. It is a profound argument for the importance of neurodiversity. What society in 1979 might have dismissed as a social disorder, a set of eccentricities and obsessions to be corrected, was, in fact, a cognitive gift of immense power. Michael's mind, unable to ignore the small dissonant details, was the one instrument perfectly tuned to hear the discordant note of the KGB's secret symphony. He reminds us that the person who notices the crack in the wall is just as important as the person who builds the wall in the first place. The parallels to our modern world are stark and undeniable. The Sears Catalog is gone, but the principle of its misuse is more relevant than ever. Today, the catalog is the Internet, a boundless, chaotic ocean of information. The background noise that spies and saboteurs seek to hide within is infinitely vaster. Covert messages are no longer hidden in product descriptions, but in the metadata of a JPEG image, in the seemingly random chatter of a video game forum, in the manipulated source code of a popular app, or in the blockchain of a cryptocurrency transaction. The art of steganography is alive and well, and the digital battlefield is infinitely more complex than the pages of a mail-order book. In this new area of cyber warfare and digital espionage, the need for minds like Michael Hartley's has never been greater. We need the systemizers, the pattern seekers, the individuals who can detect the faint, anomalous signals buried within trillions of data points. We need the people who see the world not as a story to be felt, but as a system to be analyzed. Because the threats of the 21st century are often not narratives of good versus evil, but silent, malicious lines of code. Let us close with that image of the Sears Catalog, resting on a coffee table in a suburban home in 1979. It was a book of promises, a catalog of dreams, a symbol of a peaceful and prosperous way of life. For a few short years, it was also a battlefield, a clandestine communications device in a global shadow war. Millions of people held it in their hands. They flipped through its pages, circled items, dreamt of a better future. But only one person truly read it. Only one person saw the ghost in the machine. The story of Michael Hartley is more than a fascinating historical footnote. It is an enduring reminder that the most significant contributions often come from the most unlikely of sources. That true genius can reside in the quietest corners of our society, and that the greatest secrets are often hidden not in the darkness, but in the overwhelming, blinding light of the everyday. All that is required is for someone, just one person, to have the courage and the unique vision to simply look closer.